Imagine you are sitting in a room. The room is comfortable. The temperature is perfect. There is food. There is water. There is a bed. There is light. Every physical need you have is met completely. But there is no one else in the room. There is no phone, no window, no sound from outside. Just you, the room, and silence. Now imagine that silence stretching for a day, then 2 days, then a week. Something starts to happen to you. Not slowly, not gradually. Something starts to happen almost immediately. And what happens is not boredom. It is not loneliness in the way you normally use that word. What happens is something far more physical, far more primal, and far more terrifying than either of those things. The real story of what isolation does to a human being goes back much further than any experiment, and the answer is far stranger than you have ever been told. Your body treats being alone the same way it treats being stabbed. That is not a metaphor. That is not an exaggeration. That is what the neuroscience says, and once you understand why, you will never think about loneliness the same way again. Go back 150,000 years. Your ancestors live in a group. The group is everything. It is warmth, food, protection, reproduction, and survival itself. A human alone on the ancient savanna is not a free individual. A human alone on the ancient savanna is a dead human. The math is simple and brutal. One person cannot watch all directions at once. One person cannot hunt and sleep at the same time. One person cannot care for an infant and also gather food. One person, alone, exposed, without the group around them, is prey. So your body built a warning system, an alarm so loud and so painful that it would force you to do something, anything, to get back to the group before the predators found you. That alarm is what you call loneliness. And it is every bit as physical as a broken bone. Researcher John Cacioppo spent decades at the University of Chicago studying what happens to the human body when it is socially isolated. What he found dismantled the idea that loneliness is an emotional problem. It is a biological emergency. Lonely people, he found, show elevated cortisol levels. Their inflammatory markers spike. Their immune systems begin to malfunction. Their cardiovascular systems come under stress. Their sleep architecture collapses. Their brains begin to show patterns of hypervigilance, scanning constantly for threat even in safe environments. Because a body that is alone is a body that has decided, at the deepest biological level, that it is in danger. The brain does not ask why you are alone. It does not check whether you chose to be alone. It does not distinguish between chosen solitude and forced isolation. It simply detects the absence of others and triggers the emergency response. Because in the environment it was built for, being alone and being in danger were the same thing. Now, think about what happens when that alarm runs without being answered. When the isolation continues, not for an hour or a day, but for weeks or months or years. In the 1950s, psychologist John Zubek began systematically studying the effects of sensory deprivation and social isolation on human volunteers. What he found was not what anyone expected. The subjects did not simply become sad or withdrawn. Within hours, some reported visual and auditory hallucinations, vivid, convincing, impossible to ignore. Within days, the ability to think clearly began to deteriorate. Within weeks, some subjects experienced what could only be described as a complete dissolution of the self. The boundary between where they ended and the silence began stopped feeling clear. The human mind, without the constant input of other human minds around it, begins to generate its own input. It fills the silence with something. Voices, shapes, patterns, presences, because the alternative, a mind alone with nothing, is something the brain was never designed to sustain. The most extreme documented case of involuntary human isolation in modern history may be that of Hiro Onoda, a Japanese soldier who continued fighting in the Philippine jungle alone, cut off from all human contact with the outside world from 1945 until 1974. Nearly 30 years. What psychological researchers found when they studied cases like his was not that isolation made people stronger or more self-reliant. It was that the people who survived extreme isolation all shared one thing. They created other minds. They imagined companions. They talked to the forest, to animals, to ghosts of people they had known. They populated their isolation with presence because a mind without the presence of others does not stay stable. It reaches for connection the way a drowning person reaches for anything that floats. But here is where it gets more unsettling. Because the damage isolation does to a human body is not just psychological. Researcher Steve Cole at the University of California, Los Angeles, studied how social isolation changes gene expression in human immune cells. He found that lonely people show a measurable upregulation of pro-inflammatory genes and a downregulation of antiviral genes. In plain language, isolation literally reprograms your DNA in real time to prepare for physical injury. Your body, detecting that you are alone and therefore in danger, begins preparing for a wound. It increases inflammation to accelerate healing in case you are attacked. It reduces the resources it devotes to fighting viruses because viruses are a long-term threat and predators are an immediate one. Your body is making a biological bet. It is saying, if you are alone, something is about to hurt you. Get ready. This is why chronic loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is not a figure of speech. That is the finding of researcher Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University, who analyzed data from more than 3 million people and found that social isolation increases the risk of early death by 26%. Your body cannot sustain the emergency state indefinitely. The alarm was designed to be answered. When it is not answered, when the isolation continues, the alarm begins to damage the very machinery it is trying to protect. Now, go back to that room, the comfortable room, the perfect temperature, the food and water and light, and ask yourself why none of that matters. Why a human body in perfect physical conditions, with every material need met, begins to break down simply because there is no one else present. The answer is that your body was never designed to define safety by comfort. It was designed to define safety by company. For 150,000 years, the presence of other humans was the signal that you were going to survive the night. Warmth and food and shelter mattered, but they came after the group. They were things the group provided. The group itself was the primary resource, the one without which all the others meant nothing. You are not a creature built for solitude, not even the most introverted version of you. Introversion is a preference for smaller or quieter social environments. It is not a preference for no social environment at all. The need for human connection is not a personality trait. It is a biological requirement, as non-negotiable as the need for food or water or air. And here is the most quietly devastating part of all of this. The research of Cacioppo and his colleagues found that the most damaging form of loneliness is not the kind that comes from being physically alone. It is the kind that comes from being surrounded by people while feeling unseen. Invisible. Present in body, but absent in meaning. A person in a crowd who feels unknown is running the same biological alarm as a person in an empty room. The body does not count heads, it counts connections. And a life full of people but empty of genuine contact is, to your ancient survival system, indistinguishable from abandonment. The first human who was ever truly left alone did not philosophize about it, did not journal about it, did not find perspective or silver linings or growth through solitude. They panicked, they searched, they called out into the dark. Because every cell in their body was screaming the same thing that every cell in your body screams when the silence gets too long. This is not safe. Find the others. And the next time the silence gets too long for you, the next time the room feels too empty, the next time you are surrounded by noise and faces and still feel that specific unnamed ache that has no good word in English, know this. That is not weakness. That is not neediness. That is not something you should push through or rationalize away. That is 150,000 years of survival wisdom, speaking in the only language it has ever known. Find the others.